Hello, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sadika from Amnesty International. Welcome. Thank you all for coming to this dialogue on art and human rights. Conflicts are the midwife of consciousness. And this is a collaboration between Amnesty International and Jakarta Biennale. I'm glad to welcome our guests today, artist Badi Chow, Tamara, and our host, curator Grace Sambo from Jakarta Biennale. We will hear from them shortly, but first I want to introduce you a bit about Amnesty and how we are connected to art as a human rights organization. I promise to keep this short as possible so we can quickly enjoy the talk show. So as a movement, Amnesty embraces the creativity inherent in every human, and we celebrate all artistic expression that connect people who takes injustice personally. That is why through this talk, we want to celebrate both Badi Chow, Tamara. Both are very brave artists who dares to listen to their conscience. And as we say in Amnesty, they both take injustice personally. So we'll hear more in the talk show how they have achieved to do just that. So as such, creativity has been woven through Amnesty human rights campaigns since our movement foundation about 60 years ago. And we have collaborated with artists and musicians such as Ai Weiwei, Bob Dylan, and John Legend. And through our movements around the world, we are in around 150 territories. We always try to engage with artists, and we believe in the power of art to live the humanity within us. And we have also promoted consistently freedom of speech and expression for artists all over the world. So, for example, we have helped in winning personal freedom for those like legendary Russian punk band Pussy Riot, whose government sought to silence them. So, unfortunately, we are now entering an era of increased repression on freedom of speech. So, as you might all well know, Hong Kong just passed a national security law that is so vague that virtually anything could be considered a threat to national security. In my country, in Indonesia, for the last 3 months, Amnesty at least counted at least 32 digital threat and intimidation against those who criticize the government. And this is just the ones we uncovered. So we have our job is made for us. So we think it's even more important now than ever that Amnesty, artists, and every one of you to join in solidarity to find ways to defy injustice. Because we have witnessed how, even during the most repressed era, those with art and creativity, people always find a way to convey their discontent to the public and help plant the seeds of justice within people. So at last, this event is made possible by our collaboration with Jakarta Biennale. It's one of the Asia's foremost non-profit international contemporary art event. Jakarta Biennale and Amnesty happens to have the same commitment in serving the wider public and promote human rights. And we are glad that we could realize our mutual dream, and hopefully this is a start of many more beautiful collaborations. To our audience, thank you once again for coming, and I hope you will love the talk. Good afternoon and enjoy. The floors are yours, Grace.
Hello. Hi, everyone. Before we begin, I will start with the house rules for this session. I will lay out the framework of the conversation. I will give you an artist introduction, both artist introduction, and from each artist, Badi Chow and Tamara, we will hear them speak for 20 minutes. And then we will have 15 minutes of conversation amongst the panel. And there will be slots for Q&A for 15 minutes. During this conversation, all the participants' microphones will be muted. If you would like to communicate with us, please use the chat dialogue. If you wish to ask questions, and you can do this since we start talking now, even, you can please send it to the host using the chat dialogue. And finally, we will try to answer as many questions as we can during the Q&A session. And to ensure that the discussion is focused on today's topic, questions and comments in the chat dialogue are moderated by one of our hosts. In the live chat box, there will be translations to Bahasa Indonesia. And okay, I first have to begin with an apology. I have to apologize for the fact that we have to speak in English instead of Chinese or Indonesian, which I believe a big portion of this forum would have been able to perceive better. I will not apologize for my bad English. I had to learn it from pirated DVDs that had no Indonesian subtitles. When I was in junior high and in high school, but however, I will apologize if later either me or the artist speaking could not smoothly express ourselves through this language, through English. And another disclaimer, Tamara prefers to be pronounced as Tamara. All of you English natives, please do not address Tamara as other than Tamara. As for me, I will apologize to Tamara if my tongue slipped, and I may address Tamara as she or her. This is because the fact that my brain operates in Bahasa Indonesia. And in Bahasa Indonesia, I would freely address both Tamara and Badiu Chow as dia, because our language is genderless. Dia in English may be translated to he, she, it, or they. So yeah, I will now say to Tamara in the very beginning, should this silly mistake occur from me, please forgive me, Tamara. Anyway, so many disclaimers and house rules. Now we will begin. I am the host of this conversation. I'm Grace. Hello. I am here as a member of the curatorial team of the Jakarta Biennial 2021. The biennial is drawn to artistic practices that are formulated in tactical actions and care work for and within societies. These kind of practices oftentimes cross paths with both activism and educational work, such as the necessity to confront the homogenizing official narrative and oppression upon individuals who express their concerns, in Badiu Chow's case, or one strives in demarginalizing oneself from binary settings and the demand constellations in Tamara's case. Before I introduce the two artists further, I will speak a bit more about the conversation as a format. The title of the talk, as you can see, is taken from a chapter of a book that documented the conversation of the revolutionary educator Paulo Freire and the socialist educator Myles Horton. Despite the similar qualities in their educational methods, for the longest time they had only read about each other. They finally met at the very late stage of their practices. The book was made out of several conversations that they had with each other in front of a designated university public, and later on, carefully compiled and edited to bring out parts of their thoughts and stories that were never told in the same manner. The subtitle, A Conversation About Art and Activism, is the broader framework of how this conversation came to happen. The Jakarta Biennial, as an event, as an institution, wants to invest, to boost, and to become resources for artistic practices that strive towards a better living environment. This may sound very simple, but trust me, the day-to-day reality in that striving is not and will never be simple. The quality of activism is therefore expected within the artists that we are to work with, especially if we think about the endurance of such practices, the sensibilities needed to keep things balanced, the political consciousness and consideration of each step that is to be taken, and many more. The intimacy of a conversation has a chance to unravel reflections practices. It may even lead towards a direct direction that one never before exercised. I believe that conversations can facilitate learning, not only for the speakers per se, but also for the participants at large. As the revolutionary educator Paulo Freire puts it, and I quote him, the more people become themselves, the better the democracy. End of quote. We live in times where human rights violations are perpetrated by the very people that we once allowed to take care of us, be it on the level of state, the city, town, village, neighborhood, community, or even family. No matter where we are, there are always something wrong, whatever the scale is. Most of us feel the responsibility to do something about it. Yet, only a few of us acted upon such consciousness, be it in a grand manner or in a microscopic gesture. Coming from a very different background and acting upon very different causes, Badiu Chow and Tamara are humble examples of those who courageously unravel and face particular conflicts and act upon their consciousness. With law and education as his background, what motivated Badiu Chow to lift his pen and draw? Doing history for Tamara's undergrad, what drew Tamara into art making? What is liberating in the art, and what are the limitations? What are the day-to-day realities of these kind of practices? As a discipline, what can art learn from their practice? What are the constant challenges, and how do both artists deal with it? Other than the things that we can immediately call art, what do these artists do? I guess I am framing this conversation through Paulo Freire and Myles Horton because both of them are educator figures. And the activism quality in artistic practices oftentimes carry a somewhat educational aspects in its form. In Badiu Chow's case, his comics offer a critical stance towards the authoritarian, if not dictatorial, government of China. He expresses his critical self and at the same time represents people like him who have concern towards human rights violations that are kept under, that are silenced, or even erased by the central power figure. Badiu Chow's criticality through his political cartoons allows the invoking of different sympathies, different empathies, and understanding within and towards the violations happening in China. In other words, as his work is being consumed, perceived, and circulated, and even mocked, it enters people's consciousness. Therefore, it has a chance to raise it, if not completely change it. In Tamara's case, the consequences of being labeled as a particular gender have activated a different mode of self-guarding, if not survival. Tamara's practice, at least in the recent 4 years, has been about finding similarly labeled communities, to learn about their ways of navigating life, to share Tamara's way of negotiating mundane realities. Eventually, Tamara makes all of this information, knowledge, and resource that Tamara gained along the way available to those who need it. Even at a stage where the articulation of information, knowledge, and experience is still limited, Tamara have always taken the journey with other people, a term that in digital communities would be understood as open source. Yep, with all the fragilities, as well as the exploitative possibility and counters that comes with it. By doing, by learning, by making, by interacting, and by sharing at the same time, we can say that Tamara is both an educator and a student in the framework of a Freire. An educator is someone that needs to be curious all its life anyway. An educator does not teach, rather an educator learns and facilitate exchange at the same time. These efforts towards freedom of expression, towards equality, can be seen as expectation towards a better democracy, a better living environment. How can these two artists stumble upon each other? Where do their practices bump into another? Just to jumpstart the conversation, I will start with a keyword, which is censorship. And I am very cautious in using this keyword. All the slides that you have been seeing, I have been using a miniature of a sculpture as background. The miniatures were made to demonstrate the kind of censorship that our democracy had to deal with after the so-called Reformation. I feel the urge to use the quotation mark for censorship in an Indonesian context, because after 1998, the surging cases were limitations or prohibitions done by society members instead of governmental institutions or apparatuses. This sculpture is a great example for that. The last slide, please, Jai, thank you. Jai, last slide. Yeah. Right after the problematic anti-pornography and Anti-Porn Act law that was drafted in 2006, the American President George W. Bush visited Indonesia. As you can see here in the slide, a number of mass media reported that a sculpture in the presidential palace was given clothes, like, you know, like playing Barbie or something like that. Surely it was initially a sculpture of a naked woman. Like in a different conversation, we can debate about the fact that a sculpture of a naked woman was put there in the center of the palace, but that's a different conversation. This statue was a gift from Josip Tito Broz to Sukarno. They both were known as the art-loving country leaders. And the artist actually was not just a random someone. It's a work by the renowned Czechoslovakian sculptor Marta Giraskova. There was no official statement by the president at the time, which was Susilo Bambang Yudhoyono, the first lady, the palace art collection caretaker, or even the palace staff about this clothing of the sculpture, of the statue. Even if the censorship happened in the presidential palace, it wasn't an official one. It was the palace staff that were interpreting what is allowed, what is polite, what is not sin, or what is normal. So how do we navigate these complications, convolutions? How do we stay sober for a better tomorrow? Do we keep struggling, fighting, striving? Do we put this mode on all the time? Is there an option for an airplane mode? How do we balance? Do we even think about balancing between life and practice? Isn't practice part of life? I hope through this introduction, I have briefly introduced you to the artists that are going to speak now. Before I hand over, I'm going to repeat the house rules just in case you just arrived. I just laid out the framework of the conversation while trying to weave the artist's introduction into it. And after this, we are going to hear 20 minutes from Badiu Chow, and afterwards 20 minutes from Tamara. Then the three of us are going to have a 15 minutes conversation, and we will be answering questions and answers in 15 minutes. During the conversation, all participants' microphones will be muted. If you would like to communicate with us, please use the chat dialogue. Also send us questions for the Q&A session later in the chat box dialogue. To ensure that the discussion is focused on today's topic, questions and comments in the chat dialogue are moderated by one of our hosts. And last but not least, in the live chat box, there will be translations to Bahasa Indonesia. I am handing over to Badiu Chow. Welcome. You are still muted.
Now that's better. Now you can hear me.
Yes.
Thank you everyone for joining us. So today I am giving a speech which is about art and activism. There's a way to combine these words together and we can call it artivism. I know a lot of people who would consider art should be for the sake of art. Well, art should be away from politics. But as an artist, now I think our time has demanded us to fulfill very different roles from before. And it's very important for more artists to join me and Amara to pushing art to care about our reality, to care about human condition. I think art has this divine ability, which is it giving you the power to define ideas, things, concept. When an artist is giving a chance to do things like this, it actually changed public opinion. And we are actually given a lot of resources, platform, venues to do so. So there is certain social responsibility that every artist must carry. And for our time, we need to do so. Well, I'd like to start it as a project or a set of projects that I did, which is about Hong Kong protest. If you're an audience from Hong Kong, you'll be very familiar with this idea of Lennon Wall. If you're not, but you're following the Hong Kong protest, you probably will see this colorful public art installation a lot during the coverage of Hong Kong's protest. It is a form actually originated in Prague during the 90s when the people there want to challenge the communist regime. And they started to using graffiti form or spray can to write down the message on the wall. And it began with lyrics of John Lennon's famous song. And after that, it became a symbol as a way for people to express their freedom of speech, as a way for people to express their idea against dictatorship or totalitarian regime. The Hong Kongers adapted this concept, but grow into its own city character by transform the graffiti or spray can into putting little piece of colorful notes and paste it in public space. And it started doing things 2014. So here's my role coming in. As an artist, not in Hong Kong, but in Australia, I still feel so inspired by this form. I think it's just terrific when people have this ability to express themselves in the public space and literally changing the scene of a city. This is a living analogy for democracy and expression. So I did this cartoon to featuring, well, on the left side, you'll see Xi Jinping, the Chinese chairman of the Communist Party. And on the right side is Carrie Lam, who's the leader of the Hong Kong. So I use their back, I use their body as a platform for the activists or the protest for them to express their ideas. Because ultimately, this little message on colorful notes are meant to be sent to those leaders, and they need to hear the sound of the people. But you see, art does not just stop on representing what's in the reality. It's also about get image back to the reality. All right. So in the next page, you will see a street artwork I did in Melbourne in the Halsey Lane, which is a famous street art or graffiti lane for our community. And the way that I did is back to that cartoon. I pasted a blank portrait for those two leaders and inviting the people from Hong Kong community in Melbourne, in Australia, and residents in Melbourne to join in to putting their message on that wall. So basically cloning or bringing the Hong Kong form of protest to Melbourne to introduce this form to the local community so that they can have a real feeling of what does it mean to be Hong Kong protest and what do they want to achieve and what kind of message they want to spread. And during this activism in Melbourne, that we actually facing a lot of censorship and the challenge from the people who are pro the Chinese regime. Well, there are people coming and destroy the wall all the time, and we have to rebuild it. And this thing is happening in Hong Kong as well. When you see the people who are pro-ing the Communist Party to destroying London Walls, those street art installation all the time. So it become a site that you can viewing how censorship is interfering freedom of express. Then the people are trying to fixing what has been destroyed. And of course, I'm bringing this art to more place, which on this side you'll see is actually in Berlin. It's on the Berlin Wall, which is a ultimate symbol to showing the Iron Curtains falling. But the art does not just stop in the street art, because while I'm traveling, I think, wow, it is still very hard to engage a lot of people to doing street art because it takes a lot of preparation. There's possible legal risk if you want to do it in a city. So I designed this pattern and make it into a flag. And I can travel with it and I can upload it online for people to download it for free. And if you fly this flag, it becomes a symbol for you to support Hong Kong. Well, that's me again, waving the flag in London while I'm traveling there. And then the flag got picked up by more and more different people. And you can see that there's a huge London Wall flag with the same colorful pattern being marched in Taiwan. Another very interesting country that sharing the same thread as Hong Kong. And eventually the flag went back to Hong Kong and appeared in the streets within the hand of those student protests. And even in a bigger, massive scale of it. So this has become a full life circle of art being inspired by protest, then grow into political cartoon, then grow into street art, then grow into a sort of installation of flag, and coming back to the street of Hong Kong. And that for me is the most interesting playground. It's much more exciting than traditional venue like galleries or exhibitions. In this way, art truly lives in the society. It opens to everyone. It invites everyone to express and using it. Now, let's have a look what I believe in political art or cartooning art or any art that want to challenge the authority. I think political art have this spirit to empower people. I mean, in the art, you can do things you cannot achieve in reality yet. You can imagine a picture like this that I did featuring Bruce Lee, sidekicking a riot police in Hong Kong, where in the reality, the protests are beaten deadly by those police. But in the art, we can give them the hope, we can empower the protest. And again, this work is also transferring a brutal scene when the police cracking down the protest in the university camps. There's a surreal film footage showing policemen are releasing tear gas and beating students in the playground in one of the university in Hong Kong. But art has this power to transform this brutal scene into a different way, and in a way that protest can even win in the most difficult situation. Well, the art also have the magic to depower the authority. And in this image, you will see that Carrie Lam lying down as a dead person in there. Another very important thing for art can achieve within a protest is it can always use humor to comfort the people who are in desperation. Well, one of the things that struck me the most during the Hong Kong protests and the cracking down is that so many tear gas has been fired so that the young mother who are still breastfeeding the children in Hong Kong have to discuss if this daily intake of tear gas would influence their breast milk. That shall never be something that mother should worry in a normal society. But this is happening in Hong Kong. And this kind of war scene become the Hong Kongers' daily concern. And I'm inspired by this very awful situation, and I made a cartoon to commentate on that, saying that, look, now, if you want nurturing your baby, you got a full gear as a protest, even when you're at home. I want to highlight this is because, well, during the protest, when the situation is getting worse and worse, I started receiving a lot of comments online from Instagram or Twitter. There are people saying, look, from Hong Kong to saying, I've been subject to this awful situation for months. There's rarely good news that make me want to smile. But political cartoons and humorous within your art could make my day. You know, I could just forget about the pain for a while and smile, even with tears. So that is the magic of art, how it can help the people during the most devastated situation. And that's just another cartoon that I did, commentate on Carrie Lam. You know, Hong Kongers have these 5 demands, asking for freedoms, asking for the government to withdraw the riot accusation of the protests, for a real election, for withdraw the extraditional bill, and they have these 5 demands. And for Carrie Lam, what's her 5 demands? Well, she complained in an interview saying the biggest drawback of her life is the protests stopping her going outside because she will be criticized anywhere, and she couldn't even go to the hair salon. So this is absurd. But within the absurdity, people see the humor, and it makes people laugh. And of course, I have to say, whether it's from the propaganda aspect of China or some of the Western media, when they're covering protests, especially intense social conflicts like that, they always covering the violence. And as if any protest is all violent. And you see it in the Hong Kong protests. You see when even, let's say, BBC or CNN or New York Times, when they try to illustrate the protest in Hong Kong, they were choosing the most eye-catching image, and usually there will be violence, fire, conflicts. But it does not really covering the whole protest, because we all know the majority of the protests are peaceful and non-violence. So in this way, art can join in, giving more narratives and story for the people to understand objectively of the protest itself. Now, I think as artists like me want to delivering a message to the world, as well as talking to the people inside of China who are suffering from severe censorship in a way that they don't even have the chance to see the truth of the world or of China itself. Well, in China, the censorship is everywhere to everyone, from the very beginning of the education to the last time before you die. All the internet has been controlled and censored. That the Chinese people cannot get access to the basic function of internet, including Google, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, you name it. So within this condition, how can we defeat this almost invisible censorship as an artist? I think the magic formula is within online means. Well, this is again, I think, well, kind of beyond the normal realm of artists. When you think about it, it's always about installation, painting, sculptures in a venue. But actually, if you are artists trying to defeat the Chinese regime with your art, you have to really use the internet. And the meme is such an important and great tool. I think the perfect example of it would be the analogy between Winnie the Pooh and Xi Jinping. Now we all know it, that when we want to mocking the Chinese dictator, Mr. Xi, we use Winnie the Bear, the yellow bear. And it's all originated from this photo. And I don't think the first people who posted it is meant to kind of attack on Xi. It's rather just making fun of it. But it went viral. And now the chance has been passing on to artists. How do we keep this short time meme into a forever icon so that we can use it again and again to mocking and depower the authority of the Chinese leader? And this is one of the cartoons that I did after the meme was merged online. And here's another one showing Xi Jinping hunting down Winnie the Pooh because he just doesn't like to be compared with this cute yellow bear. But that's how it works to defeat the censorship. Because Winnie the Pooh is so harmless, welcomed, and beloved by the public. It's like the water that we drink. It's like the air that we breathe, you know, you can't get around with it. So it creates a challenge to the censorship in China when you bridge these two elements between Winnie the Pooh and Xi Jinping. And you suddenly realize, well, I believe those officials in China would always knock their head and think, well, damn it, how can I do now? If I forbidden Winnie the Pooh in China, then people ask more questions about it. You know, why do you suddenly do not allow us to use the most welcomed cartoon character? And if the China fail to censor it, then we can still use the meme to mocking Xi Jinping. And that is the formula, how we defeat censorship, which is pushing the censorship to its absurdity. It is so absurd that people cannot even believe this is not allowed. And here's just a screenshot of Southern Park, which is a American popular cartoon show. And that's when that show started using Winnie the Pooh in their gags, that it's really the moment this icon become a pop culture, a pop culture that you can never erase, that everyone is talking about it and knows it. And we know that, okay, this means really success. And of course, sometimes you can create a meme and make it popular, but you can also hijack or infiltrate already existed meme. And that's also a very common way that people would use in cartooning. So the burning dog, I think most of you would see it online saying this is fine when the people is literally in a deadly situation, but pretending everything is just okay. And that's a cartoon that I did to illustrating situation for Carol Lam and Xi Jinping with intense protest situation in Hong Kong. Here's another example. The coughing dance. Suddenly, there's YouTubes of those very interesting way to not celebrate, but kind of memorize the death in a cheerful way. And then I did a cartoon to using the same energy, but showing how WHO's head and Xi Jinping is gliding on the COVID-19 situation and pushing the world into a deadly danger that we are actually still suffering, that tens of thousands of people has died. Well, the other way to bridge into the censorship is, this is a new word I think created by the Chinese netizens who have this dissent idea, and they started to call it accelerationism, 加速主义, which means, well, they know that the censorship has gone wild, and in order to making more people aware of the situation, they want to help to accelerate the effectiveness of the censorship, so that there's more common things will be forbidden in China, so that the people will realize our society is quite problematic. It's not a normal society, and we demand a change. Well, here's the example of it. Animal Crossing is a very popular game now on Switch, and I think, well, there's millions copies has been sold all over the world. And that's how Hong Kongers did it, by introducing protest from reality to the gaming space. Well, you can also see the Land War flag being put in there. You can see the Hong Kong slogans being put in there. You can see Xi Jinping's portrait being mocking in a gaming digital space. And also, of course, Joshua Wan is doing the final kick by saying, I'm playing Animal Crossing and I'm using the Hong Kong revolutionary slogan within the game. And you know what? The game is banned in China. It looks like a bad thing, right? A lot of people now cannot play that game in China, or at least they have difficulty to download it. But it also makes people wonder why. How our country is so fragile that it couldn't even face a simple game like that. All right, this is towards the end of my talk. I want to just highlight the biggest challenge I think we're facing now. Well, take a moment and have a look at this image that I did recently. It's a commentate on the relationship between China and America. And for me, as a digital artist who care about human rights and the human condition, not just in China, but generally around the world, the biggest challenge is that I have to fight both of them. I cannot just accept, celebrating Trump while he's waging so-called Chinese trade war and giving the circumstances now, it seems like Americans full on China. And I just cannot say that as long as Americans is anti-China, I would pro-America. No, because America has a lot of problems itself. And when we see interest conflict like that, as an independent artist, where can we find objectivity here? I have to say the world has entering a new time, which is very similar to the Cold War that we experienced decades ago. And this is the second run of it. And within this extreme situation and environment, it requires artists stepping out from our comfort zone, from a safe gallery, from a safe exhibition, but taking on both of the very problematic power in the world. And I think this is also my message to not just artists, also the people who want to see China be changed. While of course of fighting the Chinese regime, that we shall never surrender and giving up the principle of universal human rights, that we cannot just blind supporting one side as long as that side is against the Chinese government, that we have to supporting important issues like Black Lives Matters. We have to support important issues like racism and far right rising in American and the Western country as well. And only if we're doing that, that we can fully serve our social responsibility as an artist, as a dissident, but also just as a normal citizen. And that will be the end of my talk. And I'd like to give it back to Grace. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Badiu Chow. A note that I really haven't made in the introduction is the fact that both artists in our conversation today did somewhat begin their practices in public spheres, on the streets, and not only their localities. And Yu Chao just mentioned the privilege of mobility that artists have indeed allowed him to spread the cause that they both are fighting in various places of the planet, from Lennon Wall to Prague, from Lennon Wall in Prague to Hong Kong, and on the Berlin Wall, and finally to the internet, that so anyone can demonstrate their stance by printing and putting up the flag. This is a bridge to Tamara's presentation. I'm not going to speak long. In Tamara's case, recently is a girl band, Amuba, that have been gigs in unexpected stages. Amuba is also something that started on the streets in public sphere. I'm not going to spoil it all here. I'm sure Tamara will tell you more about it. Let us now welcome Tamara.
Okay. Yeah. Hai, hello. Kedengeran nggak ya? Kedengeran? Halo. Hai. Kedengeran nggak sih?
Hello, we can hear you, Tamara.
Oh, okay, sorry. Thank you, Grace, and the Jakarta Biennale. Thank you, Badiu Tao. And also thank you, Amnesty International, for the opportunity to share a bit about my practice and to have this conversation. Yeah, as Grace mentioned her introduction, I have a band, more of a vocal group, I guess, as none of us play instrument other than our voices. As you can see here, hello, can you kindly share my slide? Yeah, thank you. It's the four of us with a microphone, as if you are not loud enough. So yeah, us again with microphone, and yeah, these are our bars. The slide before was in a gallery cafe. And next slide, please. Yeah, some proper stage setting in art and culture event. So yeah, it's the four of us, microphones, and nice clothes, of course. Okay, one more slide, please. Yeah. I first initiated Amuba in 2013. That was right after I was involved with Machi project. Next slide, please. Yeah, a project by 3 women artists that tried to work together with transgender communities in Jogja. Machi project started in 2011. It had many public events like screening, translation, studio visit, talk, and etc. It ended with an exhibition at Kedai Kebun Forum in 2013. And right after that, I tried to make my own project. I named it We Are Human. Next slide, please. Thank you. I maybe was not aware at the time, but I think this was when I start getting tired with all the labels that were put on me, especially gender labels, because it limits how the society look at me. It also comes with society stigma. Today, I will talk about 3 projects that is always in a way haunted by activism or various causes that seem to be bigger than me, or causes that are grand in a conversation about human rights. First is about the focal group Amuba. Next slide, please. And yes, as you can see, we have fans already. Voice Indonesia say that we are the first ever trans women band in Indonesia. I'm not sure if we are or not, but I'm sure that we are the first one that they make film about. Second and third are 2 research trips to South Sulawesi and to East Java, both looking at different communities of non-binary people. How do they navigate their lives in different culture, different ethnicities, even if we are in the same country? I will also show you some work ideas that grow out of them. They are all immature, as I am still thinking about them while the same time preparing for my solo exhibition that was meant to be next September. It is now, of course, postponed. Anyway, the idea to make Amuba came in 2013 as one of the many projects that We Are Human wanted to do. A transgender band was one of it, but not all of us can play music instrument except our own instrument made by Battle Lead. How does it look like? Something like this. Next slide, please. Yeah, so yeah, you see why I choose vocal group as a format. Busking, like singing on the street, is one of the very few skills that the most transgender I know around me would have. Most of us would have a past where we work as a busker. I call it a skill, but of course I don't mean it as a skill and knowledge of actual singers, like voice technique, pitch, and all that. We simply have the performative gut, the performative courage to just sing, just dance. It is a very interesting, special kind skill if you think about it. Not because of it really is, but because it comes from a survival struggle. Back to Amuba idea in 2013. I don't have the techniques to be a good singer, so I thought we need a vocal coach, and an artist friend of mine, Tita Ruby, gave us a space to practice and suggested a vocal coach. It didn't work out well, but We Are Human had lots of ambition. So at the time, I worked very closely with Via community, the gallery, the cafe, the merchandise shop, and the travel agency. I sell a t-shirt in the shop also until before COVID. I still work part-time as a guide in Via Travel. And with Via, We Are Human managed to do English course, open up work opportunities for the trans community, be it as a travel guide, front office server, housekeeper, waiters, and others. And not only that, variety of day jobs, but also this kind of performances. Next slide, please. Thank you. Before I go into the fun part, it may be useful to reflect on why was it important that Pia opened up that kind of work opportunities, at least from my side, my perspective. Like all the NGOs and government programs seem to be thinking that trans women can only be hairdresser, open up small restaurant or warung, or be a kind of tailor or dressmaker. Those are the kinds of training that were popularly designed for trans women or for waria. There is also this atmosphere of impossibility for us to mix with the dominant binary gender people, some kind of a force to put our differences on a pedestal on stage. The fact that Fia accepted me to work with them, and after me, they also accept other non-binary people to work with them, cancel that fear. Apparently, it is not impossible. Because Amova's vocal group, I just failed. So we are human decide to make lip sync performance. Next slide, please. Number 9. Yeah, I thought at least this is one way to sing, right? So different members of the trans community join us. We brainstorm, they make their own show and blah, 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 blah. We also connect them with the many artists community in Jogja. There is always national or international artists doing different residencies in Jogja. We also try to facilitate a collaboration via this platform. And unfortunately, this all finished in 2016. Myself, we are human, and Via decided to stop this, not because we are no longer passionate about it, but because of the social and political tension toward LGBTIQ communities in Indonesia, especially in Jogja, which is supposedly one of the most tolerant cities in Indonesia. There were so many tension and some ended in violence, but I will not define this for you, so you can search this in internet. However, I will point out that this will be the only one time that I use the acronym of LGBTIQ, which is what the Indonesian majority acknowledge nowadays. I would argue that before such label exists, exaggerated by media and social media, society were considerably stable and accepting, but this is not the time and place for that discussion. And in 2016, the long-standing Pondok Pesantren Waria was forced to close by conservative Muslim group. Pondok Pesantren Waria is one of Islamic boarding school for trans people in Yogyakarta. This closure is main landmark of intolerance, at least in Jogja. Pesantren have been around for quite some time, and they have been a good neighbor in their society. So yeah, stopping our regular public presence in Via was for the safety of everyone involved. And then in 2018, I think about Amuba again. Next slide. Oh yeah. This time, I'm more mature, I guess. So I thought the name have at least two meanings. First is that Amuba is a flexible creature. Is the unicellular. In human language, Amuba don't have a singular gender. Amuba don't have to choose any gender. Amuba can reproduce itself. And second, the fun part, Amukan Banci. It's hard to translate, but maybe a shrieking sissy will fit best. Next slide, please. Okay, thank you. The picture you see early in this presentation came from a recent period, from 2018 to now. We did gigs in bars, clubs, even music concert and demonstration. And our last show was in March 2020 in Jakarta, right before things start closing down. So the show was a part of Punk Festival. Next slide. Thank you. before the thing start close down, that show, that show was part of a punk festival. I guess this time we try so hard to not only appear into charismatic stage like NGOs concert of for gender equality or gender education expo by universities or a thing like that. If in 2016 we had to vacuum for a while due to society's madness, now 2020 is really something else. Like, well, you know, so story of Amuba tells you a bit about my living context, my friends, my closest community, the people that I'm grouped together with or labeled the same, either by the society or by the government. No, I'm going to tell you my search toward different forms of friendship, of a social relationship in a context that may look similar, simply because it is all Indonesia and simply because people would label us trans, but each context in each and every one of us are really, really different, incredibly and necessarily different. Let's go to the next slide. Okay. Two pictures on the top are archival. They depict ritual performed by Bisu, the fifth gender in Bugis society in South Sulawesi. And the first image was of Mapa Lili, which is an agricultural ritual. And the second is a challenging one, as it is to prove that Bisu is somewhat fireproof. And the third picture was taken in front of a cave where the Bisu used to hide when the bloody 1965 genocide in Indonesia happened. The genocide is known to have killed like 500 until 1 million people, mainly because of communism and of course how America had them. But there is another story that is just as complicated as unresolved. The story of Kahar Muzaffar, who came from a South Sulawesi context, and the story of DITI, or the Indonesian Islamic Army, Darul Islam. Not a long story, but yeah. And it is important for me to be accepted, to feel accepted by the business community, to eventually be their friends. I have been coming back and forth since 2016. Next slide, please. Thank you. Now I feel that they are more and more accepting me as we are in a communication with each other. The first image is the head of Bisu that lead the Segeris in 2017. And the second one is Bisu Eka. Behind Bisu Eka is a Bocok Silino, an old script that tells the story of a society where Bisus alive, and she gave me a Bocok Silino. I mean, there's a bonding things, right? Or at least that is how I see it. In the Bocok Silino, there are many social rituals in which Bisu have to go through and have to lead. The next slide, please. Thank you. And this is an installation I did for Biennale Jogja 2019. There were several athletes outside the installation, which is like one room in the museum, which is dark. On the floor, there is a screen, a TV, a monitor. The screen is almost flat on the floor, so your head have to tilt down if you want to watch the video. Sort of like you have to duck down to witness the lives of the Bisu. It is a documentary video of my journey, my encounters in South Sulawesi. And next slide, please. Thank you. Because there are flashlight outside the space, by reflex, you take it, or when you turn on the flashlight, you realize that there are drawings on the wall. So you start pointing flashlight to this wall. It kind of looks like a cave paintings, but it's colorful. So if you explore the room, you can read it like a comic. The image tells you the story of ritual in the lives of Bugis society. I was interested in how people would try to read the stories with a limited light. Would they be patient enough to slowly point with lights, or would they hurry because it's dark? So if you remember the photo that I was just showing, can we go back to the, yeah, thank you. Where there is photo of cave. Yeah, thank you. This installation in the biennial adopted that cave experience you see in the photo. Okay, let's go back to the installation photo. Thank you. Anyway, I'm very excited with different ritual in business leaf. I can talk all day about this. One example, a ritual called Matinro. It is like mati suri in bahasa. What is in English? Something like coma, almost die, or torpor, but it is expected. Unlike in sickness or disease, where it is a surprise, bisu prepares to get into this mati suri or torpor condition. They say it takes them to another realm, another reality. In my logic, or what I learned from this, is how this ritual is about looking into one's own self, looking into inside yourself, inside your body, inside your corporeal, like a break from normal social life where your environment look at you, define you, demand you to be this and that. So during this pandemic, all the bad side inside yourself come out. And because you are locked indoors, there is almost no way other than to confront that bad side. And before the pandemic, I started working on a new artwork inspired from this ritual. I cannot show you now, but I can tell you a bit about it. It is an installation made out of used t-shirt, mainly black. I cut and weave the t-shirt, or you can say, I make ties and bondage with the t-shirt, so that it become a soft sculpture. A soft sculpture of a vagina, soft sculpture that will be the entrance of my exhibition. I want to offer the thought of going back into your mother wombs, because gender norm exists before the gender norm exists, before there are expectation of what you should be, before you have rules in the society. Why we go back to mother wombs to think again about ourselves, our existing life. It's multiple sides. To free our minds from society's demand and expectation, to have courage to be ourselves. Anyway, it's a work in progress. So let's go to the cross-dressing culture in slide 17. Thank you. These are photos from my trip to Jombang and Mojokerto, both in East Java. In this trip, I also end up expanding my friendship, my community. I only started this research late last year. I'm interested in looking at cross-dresser who are actors in Ludruk, a type of local tradition performing arts, folk arts, people arts. Ludruk operates in a group and they are mobile like gypsies. They move from one village to another to perform for villagers. It is amazing to see how this actual life. They have paddy fields and hairdressing salon, but at the same time, they are also actors in all these different roles in their daily life. They are like totally different person, like the farmer, the hairstylist, and the actor that basically can be anything, can play the role of anything. They are trans people, even if they maybe don't want to be called that. I'm very curious about this cross-dressing culture coming from folk art. More and more, because it's a traditional art, you would think that in village, they are conservative, but if this form of art is more than 100 years old, it means that trans have been part of the society since forever. At least way before Abrahamic religions came, this folk art as a form have survived all the change that came with religion and wars and battles. For example, the case of Sri Panggung, popular actor Umi Salamun have Hajj label after pilgrimage to Mecca. Of course, Umi, the journey was taken as a normal man, but argue that Umi Salamun is a trans woman that she prefer to be pronounced as she. Umi Salamun's family cannot accept her as a transgender. That means that her neighbor also cannot accept it. So at home, Umi dressed as a man who owns hair salon business. Nevertheless, when Umi is going to perform, to act in the backstage, Umi start putting makeup, then put on the dress, and yeah, Umi becomes a woman. All these rules that Umi plays is really like giving a form that to the different self that are inside oneself. Next slide, please. Well, this is not Umi, this is me. Anyway, with their costumes, I try to play this multiple self, multiple profession, multiple identity rule. I try them on and make pictures like this. Next slide, please. When I think of Umi and many of the Ludruk actor, it is like Umi create faces for her own multiple identities, not just face, but also profession in Umi case. So I dare to argue that the multiple self gets more satisfaction because they all have their own forms. Let's go to the last slide. And yeah, this is from me now. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Tamara. I want to roar back at you, but I don't feel like I have the performative gut or performative skill to do that. Okay, so we've heard from both sides, and from Tamara's presentation, I realized one aspect that also I didn't point it out in my introduction, maybe a bridge to the conversation for the three of us. Actually, I don't really know if it's a conversation. Can everyone see the three of us in the screens? No? Can everyone see the three of us on the screens? We cannot see the three of us at the same time. Okay. Okay, so from what Tamara mentioned about the ending of Tamara's presentation on multiple identities actually also reminded me, like when I started looking at Chao's practices earlier on, your appearances in interviews and all that were masked, were wearing masks way before COVID, and for very different reasons. And quite some of the questions that are that I started seeing now also addresses that in terms of like how do you struggle the different identities that you have to sort of perform, I guess, and what does it mean to have that multiple identity and to sort of acknowledge, and at the same time acknowledging the privilege of being an artist, to be able to express, to show, to bring things to different places. How does that work? And in relation to that, I also want to point out what Tamara coined as atmosphere of impossibility in relation to fear and the need to move to different places, not simply because it is a privilege of artists, but because you do have to move to different places because it's simply not safe. And I guess that is my first question for both. And yeah, can maybe we start with you, Chow?
All right, sure. I mean, well, it's a great question, but also it's a hard question. So in the very beginning of my art practice, I have to, wearing a mask and actually hiding my identity, because I know once the Chinese government know who I am, regardless where I am, in China or outside of China, they could punish me and harass me and threatening me to stop making art as the way that I like. And that experience is quite unhealthy, I have to say. I mean, we as human beings is very important to have different roles and identity, but also kind of embrace all of those identity. But for me, I cannot share my work or accomplishment or pain or my inspiration with my real life at all. That I cannot discuss with a friend or family about my political view or my art creation, because if I do that, it will bring in danger to them. It will creating this risk that the Chinese government might find out who I am via the one that I know. But on the other hand, like if I want to share and present myself as an artist, then I cannot talking about anything which is in my normal life, and it's definitely not a good experience. I am living as two persons by the time, and I have to keep it very separately, just so that I can protect myself and my family. And of course, I'm not naive that I don't believe I could do this forever, because the Chinese authority have a lot of tools to understand and tracking down who you are, which is exactly what happened before I have my Hong Kong exhibition. They find out who I am and they threatened my family. And after that, I have to make a choice that do I, disappear as an artist and keep living as just a normal person in Australia, or I actually embrace both of my identity and I show myself to the public saying, look, this is me. I am not afraid of you. Yes, I know there will be consequence, but I don't think if I've been silent that our society will change better and I could face a life without me doing art as I like. So, I mean, here I am with my face masked down.
Tamara, what about moving around? What does that mean for you? And is it something related to also impossibility of expressing, even though I guess the circumstances are so different? But what does moving around mean? You are still muted. Tamara, you are still muted.
Hi, Grace. Can you repeat the question?
I was just wondering what does you say something about impossibility or fear, and I thought of mobility. I thought of the drive to move around, and not to compare, but just to imagine the different motivations between moving around. Because in well, you did move around. You live in now you live in Jakarta. You technically live in Jogja, but you came from Tasikmalaya. What is moving around for you, and is that related to fear of expressing your?
Suaranya Jigres nggak jelas, keputus-putus. It's yeah, actually I'm moving around because not only because of fear, but also because I remember what my mom said when I was a child. Wherever you live, to memenuhi kebutuhan itu apa sih? To fill out what you need, so you just act like how you call it in English? Bunglon apa? Like not camouflage. Like I remember my last performance at Jakarta Art Council when I was writing on the ice block. So everywhere I go or wherever I live, just make sure if I be inclusive with the societies around.
Right. I was expecting for a longer conversation, but seemingly we actually have a lot of questions and some that we addressed a bit just now. And I will start I will first start with like the one remark that was uh, because of my introduction. Uh, there's a question whether I am claiming. Can you hear me correctly? Can you all hear me okay?
The internet isn't in its best quality. I think the sound wasn't really clear.
Okay. I will try to change. You can hear my dog. Anyway, there's a question that asks if I am claiming that if I'm claiming that censorship made by the society or enforced by a society is more impactful than the covert and systematic actions that the government keep being made in this context. It's not that clear of a distinction, I think, but I just simply cannot feel comfortable using the word censorship in the same way that you, Yu Chao, is using the word censorship, because it is not structural and it is not systematic. There are different forms of censorship that is happening within our government, but you don't necessarily see it as like limitations of freedom of expression per se.
Right.
So, but the difficulties with society censorship is the fact that the enemy can be your neighbor. It doesn't have to be the policeman in a police uniform or the army. It really can mean that people live across your house is your enemy. And it's threatening to you, something like that. And I'm going to go into questions that are being similar questions that are being addressed, particularly on the word change for both of you. What kind of changes, Liu Chao, you think in Hong Kong that you could bring by challenging the government through your artworks?
Right.
And I think I can bring it further to the rights of free speech, since it's limited and Chinese government is increasingly strong on censorship. How do
Right.
you stay true and creative to what you are producing? And yeah, did the work in Hong Kong cause you trouble, or are you afraid of being silenced?
Sure.
How
I
do
Okay. I think you're mentioning a very important point before, which is censorship comes in different forms. Well, it might not be imposed by, riot police or national security police, but there are peer pressures and social pressures or kind of discrimination and bias in our society in all different form of societies, which is not just about Hong Kong and China. It's in Indonesia, it's in America, it's in Australia as well. But art is always this way to bring in conversation around the most taboo topic, because we have this privilege, or even like a shield to say, look, we're an artist, we're allowed to be different, we're allowed to experiment, including touching the most sensitive, social topics. And in China, because the situation is so extreme, that the very basic fabric of justice and rule of law and democracy is a forbidden topic. And as you can see, the censorship is also worse. But in a more open society, perhaps in Indonesia or in any of the European countries, there are still topics which can be seen as controversial. And so I think as artists that we all have our different routes to touching those red lines. In China, you have democracy and freedom as the red line. In Indonesia, you have LGBT community surviving, or the society's attitude towards minority, sexual minority is a taboo. In America, you see, you have racist problem, you have a racist president, and that is the problem. We all have our own topic to discuss. Back to Hong Kong now. I think Hong Kong has experienced this downgrade or destroying of freedom in the real lifetime in this 1 year period since the very beginning of the anti-extraditional protests in Hong Kong last year, June, that people have this freedom to go on the street, to chanting, to even organizing, confrontation between demonstration and the police. But now, because of the national security law, it seems like everything has died. But I also want to point it out, the sacrifice of Hong Kongers and Hong Kong's freedom and democracy does not just go wasted. The biggest achievement from the sacrifice is that the Hong Kongers has weakening a lot of people around the world, including people in America, in Europe, in Australia, and in the country in the Indo-Pacific Ocean, to realize that China is so aggressive. And by witnessing the falling of Hong Kong, it's a warning bell to everyone that this is not going to just stop at Hong Kong. It will, expand almost like a virus if we do not see it properly and take actions. And the good thing is also, now I've already seen in Australia, there is, diplomatic change. In American yesterday, there was this very they call it the second version of, Iron Curtain speech by Pompeo. So that is the achievement of the Hong Kongers. And I know the situation in Hong Kong seems like so devastated now, and it seems like there's so little space for the protests can do any effective movement. But I also see how the protests in Hong Kong are doing more smartly. For example, when the slogan of Hong Kong's protests, glory to Hong Kong, revolution now is forbidden in Hong Kong, that people do not even know what they can be allowed to hold in the street. So this one smart girl just holds a white sheet of paper and saying, look, I don't know what kind of words would subject me to the national security law, but as long as I have this gesture, it's almost like a performance art in public space. As long as you have this gesture, even with a blank sheet of paper, it is powerful. It reminds people what happened and inspire people around the world to understand the situation in Hong Kong, to understand the true face of the Chinese government. So within those little gestures and continuing protest, I still see hopes. And this hope will grow in the longer term with more people joining us. And I also want to make this calling. You know, sometimes the bad human condition issues and the bad human rights issues is somehow brutally blessed to artists because we see the struggling of human beings, and then it is so powerful and inspiring. So I want to call more artists join in, to join the Hong Kong protests, to join the people who in China, you know, uprise up against this regime and creating art to make their voice being heard when they losing the ability to voice themselves, to share the risk and to share the burden with those in need. Okay. I think you're still muted, Grace. Yeah, there you go.
So, yeah, on the note sharing, I want to use that to bridge for a question that is so broad. Tamara, what can people outside Indonesia do to help with the issues that the non-binary people are dealing with in an Indonesian context? Unmute, please.
Actually, I'm not really sure what they can help to Indonesian LGBTQ communities in Indonesia, because this issue, like in a global issue, is not only in Indonesia. So maybe just connect to each other community in each country. That would help and share the experiences. That's all. So I don't really know actually what they can help here.
I'm going to, actually we passed our time, so now I'm just going to read all the questions and see how we can deal with it. And Tamara, particularly for you, if you don't feel comfortable in answering in English, maybe you can answer in Bahasa, and in the chat box it will be translated to English. 3 more questions for you, but you Chow. It is a long one. You can choose. You don't have to answer everything. Some broad stuff like, what do you want to say to people in Hong Kong in this difficult time? I guess difficult in a Hong Kong case has several layers at the situation, no? Yeah. And also, what is your, in coming back to mobility as an issue, there are different situations faced by people that are bounded with place, like people in Hong Kong or in Papua in Australia. Can you share more reflection on that issue, especially regarding the repression and censorship? Yeah, how do you think we can find middle ground symbol that still have some resonance in this kind of situation?
Okay. I think for Hong Kongers, firstly, the ones who choose to stay in Hong Kong or the ones cannot flee from Hong Kong, I think it's very important to protect yourself, whether it's in a digital space or in a social life space. It's very important to disguise your trace online. It's very important to use software like VPN or other way to hiding your identity, because it's still very important to do so. Even I am a bad example for showing people how to hide, but still I managed to being anonymous for a couple of years, and this period of time buying me a lot of space to do activism. So for the Hong Kongers, I think it's very important to learn those basic skills, that how you can protect yourself on internet. And I think there's always place to maneuver. There's always way to protest. For me, I've been living in this situation longer enough that inside of China, there's no way you can spread any message. And while I'm making work, I always questioning myself, will my work really be seen by the people in China? Would it really make a difference? Or it's just me, doing my own business? I think my personal hero is Sisyphus. The man or the god who is punished to push a rock to the peak of the mountain, and which is doomed to rolling down. So he had to repeating this failure again and again. But I don't see it's pointless. It's not meaningless. It's exactly how hero and heroine will be created in this seems like meaningless process, because the motivation to push her to do things shall not be if we can see the outcome or not. The only motivation for me is if this is a right thing to do. And for the Hong Kongers and for the people who are supporting Hong Kongers, regardless the difficulty, regardless how powerful the Chinese government has been growing into this kind of gigantic monsters, that it is still just to fighting for your freedom and democracy, so that we shall not give up. But to be more practical, I think for Hong Kongers, it's always important to record your history and your contemporary reality now, because the way censorship works is it want to erase your memory, it want to erase your language, it want to erase your identity. But for the Hong Kongers in Hong Kong, you can always keep practicing Cantonese, you can always recording the memory of Hong Kong's history, the memory of this city while you still having the freedom and democracy. And that's very important, so that you can have this identity regardless how China want to brainwash or erase it from you. And that's the minimal level for everyone can still doing it. But for the ones who, there will be a lot of Hong Kongers go overseas, including Australia, in the UK and in other places, then those people would spark huge energy in the international society. And I've already witnessed how capable and talented for those Hong Kongers in the Melbourne community, that we arrange so many interesting public art, protests, and an event, and we're all just ordinary people. So it's very powerful for the Hong Kong community. Yes, the city might fall, but the people and its identity and its culture will keep thriving and spreading all over the world, just like what Tibetan did with the Tibetan Buddhism, just like what Uyghur people did, and lobbying in different countries for their beliefs and telling the world how China is doing the genocide. I know that Hong Kongers are entirely capable of doing the same thing and even doing more. So don't give up hope. It's just the very beginning of a marathon-like fight. And I think we will win in the end, just like the cartoon that I did.
Thanks. I'm now going to read several questions for Tamara because I think they sort of relate to each other. The first would be, hello Tamara, I'm fascinated about your work using the darkness of the room to let people imagine that they are back to your mother's womb, to bring them to a new perspective. How do you find the inspiration when creating work? And coming back to hope and possible changes, there's also a question like, what kind of change do you want to bring to the trans community through your work? And like I mentioned before, if it's easier to answer in Bahasa, you can answer in Bahasa and we will translate.
Okay, Grace, thank you very much to make it more flexible for me. Yeah, actually, I'm always feel lose my power when I'm using English rather than I'm use Bahasa. So thank you very much for that. Yeah, actually, jadi sebenarnya ide itu muncul selama saya melakukan riset di Sulawesi Selatan dan di Mojokerto. Serta ide itu muncul sebenarnya makin kuat karena selama pandemi ini saya juga mau nggak mau sama seperti orang lain dirumahkan. Artinya selama dirumahkan lebih banyak memikirkan ke dalam, lebih banyak memikirkan diri sendiri ketimbang memikirkan pekerjaan-pekerjaan atau hal-hal yang sebenarnya lebih banyak dilakukan keluar sebenarnya. Ide itu muncul sebenarnya dari situ. Lalu pertanyaan kedua, apa yang bisa dilakukan untuk perubahan apa yang dilakukan untuk teman-teman komunitas waria di Yogyakarta? Gitu, Grace? Your speaker, sorry.
Azan.
Oh, Azan.
They are calling. So I was muting myself. Sorry, I missed the second one. The second one.
Can you repeat the question?
I missed your second answer. Like what kind of change? What kind of change do you want to bring to the trans community?
For sure, the better life, of course. I mean, that's ya itu terdengar sangat abstrak gitu. Hidup yang lebih baik seperti apa ya? Tergantung juga hidup yang dianggap baik oleh teman-teman komunitas juga seperti apa gitu. Karena ini bukan persoalan aku ingin merubah mereka, tapi bagaimana juga mereka punya keinginan untuk sama-sama merubah kehidupan atau menentukan kehidupan yang lebih baik dari sekarang gitu. Di luar persoalan pressure dari lingkungan gitu.
And since we are running out of time, I would like to pose the last question that is addressed to again both of you. And the question is.
What's the question?
I can hear you laughing, Tamara. The question is again broad, but I really think this is a good wrap up if we find a way to sort of address this. The question is, what's your view whether your art, your work, your expression today can be seen as an ethical response of the situation, of the different situations that you're facing?
Sorry, can you repeat the question again? It was a bit cut off.
What's your view on whether your art, your work, your expression today, should it be seen as an ethical response of the situation that you are facing?
Okay. I think, well, one of the biggest difficulty that I'm facing now is the internet is my only platform. I am actually being censored, in Hong Kong as well as in Australia, because China's threat is really everywhere. That even the gallery in Australia would refuse to exhibit my work due to the fear that they might facing the China's retaliation. So I really would like to see more support so that I can, showing the work in different venues. And I genuinely believe we have entering a very different era of human beings' history, which we have experiencing a very peaceful decades. But now it seems like everything is falling into a black hole again, and there's so many uncertainty of even the possibility of major world war what happened because of tension between China and the rest of the world. So with this environment and backgrounds, that I think more artists should join. I have to say that as an artist, I do not feel mainstream. I feel I'm still an alien to a lot of the so-called mainstream art world, that people are still challenging my form of art, saying, "Oh, look, this is activism. This is political. It's not art. Art should be a pure exploration of sensation, experience, or beauty." And I want to challenge that notion, and I think is a critical choice for the rest of us, not just within the art community, but also broadly. Our aesthetics must change and viewing art differently, because we are in a different world now. And artists should be the persons foreseeing this change of our society. So that would be my hope for our society to change, within and without, within and also outside of the art community.
Thank you. Tamara, what about you?
Terhadap situasi di sekitar lo. Ya mungkin bisa dianggap sebagai respon etis ya dalam proses praktek kesenian saya ataupun kekaryaan saya gitu. Cuman kalau ngomongin soal keberpihakan, nampaknya susah ya untuk menentukan keberpihakan gitu. Karena banyak sisi yang harus dibaca gitu, dan harus disimpulkan sebagai sebuah pengetahuan. Jadi mungkin keberpihakannya pada kesetaraan pengetahuan yang sama gitu, bukan lagi pada satu kelompok. Itu aja. Terima kasih.
Okay, going to wrap up for now. Thank you so much, both of you, Badiu Chow and Tamara. I hope we meet again in a different circumstances and hopefully offline.
Sure, yeah, it's a pleasure.
Thank you so much, and thank you so much, Amnesty International, for hosting this. I should hand it back to Sadika.
Okay, thank you very much, everyone. I would like to thank you, Jakarta Biennale, first of all, for having agreed and finally realizing our dream of having events together. And I hope this is just the start of many more collaborations together. And I would also like to thank you, Badiu Chow and Tamara. Thank you for taking the time to talk, and I hope we can meet again, online, offline, anywhere. And thank you, the audience, for your enthusiasm. You've given us such great questions. And I hope let's enjoy dinner and enjoy the rest of the night. Thank you all.